Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers were once inseparable, on and off the screen. After years of working side by side on one of television's most iconic shows, their friendship vanished without warning. For decades, no one knew why until O'Connor, at the age of 74, finally broke his silence. And what he revealed stunned everyone. When All in the Family first aired in 1971, few could have predicted the cultural tidal wave it would become. At the center of it all was the gruff, opinionated Archie Bunker, played by Carroll O'Connor, and his passionate, strong-willed daughter Gloria, portrayed by Sally Struthers. Their on-screen clashes were legendary, but off-camera, their connection was something else entirely. Despite a 30-year age gap, O'Connor and Struthers formed a deep, almost familial bond. Colleagues described it as instant. During rehearsals, the two would often huddle together, sharing jokes, notes, and genuine affection. What audiences saw on screen, a complicated but loving father-daughter relationship, mirrored what was developing behind the scenes. O'Connor, who had no daughter of his own, often referred to Struthers as "my girl." She, in turn, praised him publicly as a mentor, protector, and at times a surrogate father figure. The two would often arrive on set early just to run lines together, even when it wasn't required. Between scenes, Struthers was frequently seen seated beside O'Connor, laughing at his dry wit or leaning in for advice. In interviews and press junkets, the admiration flowed both ways. O'Connor praised her comedic timing and emotional range, while Struthers credited him for helping her navigate the industry with dignity and professionalism. Their bond became part of the show's appeal. While Archie was known for his brashness and controversial views, it was his love for Gloria that often humanized him, and the tenderness in those moments was not just acting. It was built on something real. Castmates later recalled that when the cameras stopped rolling, their closeness only grew stronger. When Struthers landed other roles or projects, O'Connor would often call or send her notes of encouragement. She once revealed that he was one of the first people to congratulate her after winning 2 Emmy Awards. He wasn't just proud, he was genuinely invested in her success. That level of devotion was rare in Hollywood, especially in a business where age, ego, and fame often build invisible walls between generations. Even off-set, their relationship stood out. They would attend red carpet events together, speak at award ceremonies for one another, and appear on talk shows side by side. When asked about her bond with Carroll, Struthers said, "He was more than a co-star. He was my family. He made me feel safe in a world that rarely does." By all accounts, theirs was a friendship built on mutual respect, loyalty, and love. Fans adored their dynamic, and many assumed their connection would last for life. But as the years went on, cracks began to form, subtle at first, barely noticeable to outsiders, yet something had shifted. And that shift would soon spiral into something no one saw coming. As All in the Family progressed into its later seasons, so did the subtle change in energy between Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers. On the surface, everything looked the same. They still delivered powerful scenes and still smiled during press tours. But behind the curtain, their once effortless connection was beginning to feel strained. It started with whispers among crew members. Tensions, they said, had begun to bubble during table reads. Struthers, who had grown more confident in her craft, was reportedly becoming more vocal about her lines, questioning direction or requesting rewrites. That kind of input wasn't unusual for seasoned actors. But on a set where O'Connor held significant creative control, it raised eyebrows. O'Connor was protective of the show. He was more than just its star. He shaped its tone, argued for its message, and guarded its legacy fiercely. Some insiders say he began to see Struthers' newfound assertiveness as disruptive, not out of malice, but out of fear that the balance they had so carefully built was slipping. He was a perfectionist. She was evolving, and that evolution created distance. There were also rumblings of artistic differences. Episodes that leaned into heavier topics sparked quiet disagreements. O'Connor wanted a more grounded, often darker realism, while Struthers leaned into the hope and heart of her character. It was never explosive or loud. There was tension like two artists painting on the same canvas with different brushes. Then came the issue of screen time. As spin-offs like The Jeffersons and Maude took off, producers began adjusting storylines. Struthers' character appeared less frequently. While this was partly due to her own outside opportunities, some suspected resentment was brewing. She was still young, still hungry. Being sidelined, even slightly, may have felt like a betrayal, and O'Connor, always fiercely protective of the show's direction, may have seen her ambition as disloyal. One moment in particular stood out to those watching closely. During an awards ceremony where the cast was being honored, O'Connor gave a heartfelt speech, but noticeably failed to mention Struthers by name. She smiled through it, clapping along with the rest. What a close-up revealed something colder in her eyes, a blink, a shift, small but unmistakable. Still, nothing was made public. There were no open feuds or dramatic interviews, but those closest to the production could feel it. A once magnetic bond was beginning to unravel, and the timing of that unraveling would prove devastating. Because just as their friendship was faltering, Carroll O'Connor's world would be shattered by something far worse. In 1995, O'Connor's life took a devastating turn. His only son, Hugh O'Connor, tragically took his own life after a long struggle with addiction. The news sent shockwaves through Hollywood. But for O'Connor, it was more than a loss. It became a mission that would consume him for years. The pain was raw, public, and all-consuming. Everything else, acting, interviews, old friendships, suddenly fell away. He channeled his grief into an intense legal battle, going after the man he claimed had supplied the drugs that led to Hugh's death. He testified before lawmakers, pushed for tougher drug laws, and appeared on national television calling for change. His once cheerful interviews were replaced with somber reflections, and even his voice carried a new kind of weight, shaky, emotional, and scarred. During this time, fans began to notice something odd. As tributes poured in from all corners of the industry, one voice was notably absent: Sally Struthers. There was no statement, no interview, no public appearance by O'Connor's side. It didn't take long for people to start asking why. The woman who once called him her second father was nowhere to be found during his darkest hour. Some close to O'Connor hinted that he felt abandoned. Whether Struthers stayed silent out of respect, fear of saying the wrong thing, or emotional distance, it clearly struck a nerve. He had lost his son, but in the months that followed, it seemed like he lost her too. That silence grew louder with each public event she missed. Later, at a memorial service for Hugh, nearly every cast member from All in the Family attended, but Struthers did not. Her absence was not only noticed, it was talked about. Rumors swirled. Some said she had sent a private letter. Others claimed she had been asked not to attend. Whatever the truth, O'Connor's expression throughout the ceremony was unmistakable grief, mixed with disappointment. In interviews around that time, he became more withdrawn, more guarded when speaking about his old co-stars. The warmth he once showed when asked about Struthers was gone. Instead, he would simply nod and move on. No elaboration, no shared memories. For someone who once lit up at the mention of her name, the change was impossible to ignore. There was speculation that the pain of losing his son had hardened him. Others believed the emotional distance between him and Struthers had been building long before the tragedy, but the loss had made it irreversible. The grief created a wall between them, one that neither seemed willing or able to tear down. And then, just when the dust seemed to settle, the quiet fracture between them erupted into something far more visible. It wasn't a feud, but a moment that made it clear to everyone watching that whatever friendship they once had, it was no longer intact. The final rupture between Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers wasn't marked by scandal, shouting, or public betrayal. It was marked by a quiet but unmistakable break, one that happened behind closed doors. It reverberated through Hollywood for years. According to insiders, the tipping point came during a reunion project that never fully came to life. Producers had pitched a retrospective on All in the Family, hoping to gather the original cast for a special event. Everyone assumed O'Connor and Struthers would reunite, if only for the fans. But behind the scenes, something went wrong. During the early stages of planning, a private phone call between the two reportedly turned unexpectedly tense. The details of that conversation were never fully revealed, but one insider described it as sad and final. What began as polite conversation reportedly shifted into unresolved grievances. O'Connor, still raw from years of grief, Allegedly, expressed disappointment in how Struthers had handled things after Hugh's death. Struthers, blindsided, tried to explain, but the wounds were too deep. There was no yelling, just silence. And then the line went dead. Some close to the situation believe it wasn't just about grief. Politics had also become a quiet, dividing line. In the years following the show's success, Struthers became increasingly vocal in her activism and advocacy, championing progressive causes. O'Connor, while not confrontational, was known to hold more private and sometimes opposing views. Those differences, once irrelevant, may have added friction as both navigated the public spotlight in their later years. The aftermath was telling. When the reunion project aired in a modified format without full cast participation, fans noticed O'Connor and Struthers were never shown together. Separate interviews, separate stories, separate legacies. For a duo once seen as inseparable, it was a jarring reality. During this period, journalists began asking more direct questions. In one interview, Struthers was asked whether she still kept in touch with O'Connor. Her smile faded. "We had a good run," she said quietly. "Sometimes life pulls people in different directions." It was a polite answer, but it said everything. O'Connor, on the other hand, never spoke directly about the call or the failed reunion, but his tone in interviews changed. When All in the Family came up, he talked about its message, its impact, and its legacy, rarely about the people, rarely about her. From that point on, they were no longer friends, just former co-stars connected by a legendary show and an unforgettable history, though no public feud ever erupted. It was clear the bond that once held them together had quietly and permanently unraveled. But while their silence told one story, what came next proved there were still emotions simmering just beneath the surface. For years after their final fallout, Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers lived in separate orbits. Both remained in the public eye, but their paths never crossed again, at least not publicly. For longtime fans of All in the Family, that silence said more than any interview ever could. During television retrospectives and reunion panels, Struthers participated, but O'Connor was often absent. When he did appear, she was not there. Viewers noticed that the warm, light-hearted stories that once flowed freely between them were now replaced with awkward deflections and uncomfortable pauses. Whenever journalists asked about the other, both offered careful, measured responses that revealed very little. In one sit-down interview, O'Connor was asked whether he kept in touch with his former television daughter. His eyes shifted away as he muttered, "We had some good times. Things change." That was all he said. No fond memories, no laughter, just a distant tone from a man who had once been her biggest supporter. Struthers had her own version of this silence. In a morning show appearance in the early 2000s, she was asked who she missed most from the original cast. She named everyone except him. When the host followed up, she simply said, "Some things are too personal to get into." It was vague but heavy. Industry insiders began to confirm what fans had long suspected: the two had not spoken in years. One source described their rift as unfixable, not because of hatred, but because too much had been left unsaid for too long. They were occasionally invited to the same award events, but they sat apart, never greeting one another. Those who had known them in their prime found it hard to believe. These were two people who once finished each other's sentences. Now they passed each other like strangers. As O'Connor's health declined, some thought she might reach out. She did not. Whether it was pride, regret, or unresolved pain, she stayed quiet. And for O'Connor, the window for reconciliation was slowly closing. Yet, while silence had become their new normal, it would not last forever, because at 74, Carroll O'Connor finally spoke up, and what he said changed everything fans thought they knew. In a rare televised interview, just a few years before his passing, Connor was asked about the personal toll his career had taken. It began like so many interviews before it, with talk of All in the Family, the weight of fame, and his years of advocacy work. But then, Almost unexpectedly, the conversation shifted. The interviewer mentioned his former castmates, and when Sally Struthers' name came up, O'Connor paused. What followed was a moment of quiet vulnerability. "I wish things had ended differently with Sally," he said softly. "We had something really special. Then life got in the way." It was the first time he had ever publicly acknowledged the fracture in their relationship. There were no rehearsed lines, no careful deflections, just a statement that felt raw and unscripted. He didn't go into detail, but the pain was unmistakable. He hinted that grief had made him distant, harder to reach. "When my son died, I changed," he admitted. "I shut people out. Some were understanding, some not so much." Though he never blamed her directly, the implication was there. The silence between them had not been one-sided. He spoke not with bitterness, but with regret. No anger, no resentment, only sadness. "Sally was like a daughter to me," he added. "We were so close, maybe too close for it to survive everything that came after." That line struck a chord with viewers, especially those who remembered their on-screen bond. It was as if O'Connor was admitting, after all those years, the loss of that friendship still haunted him. What made the confession even more striking was its timing. O'Connor wasn't promoting a new project or seeking publicity. He was simply reflecting, perhaps aware that his time was growing short. In that moment, fans saw a different side of him. Not the gruff, unshakable Archie Bunker, but a man weighed down by quiet sorrow and unresolved emotion. The interview aired on a Sunday night. By Monday morning, it was everywhere. Headlines focused on his comments about Struthers, and social media lit up with messages of shock, sadness, and empathy. For years, people had speculated about what had happened between them. Now there was confirmation. Something real and deeply personal had ended. And O'Connor had carried that loss with him until the end. Some who watched believed the interview. God was his way of reaching out a final olive branch. Not to rekindle their friendship, but to make peace with what had been lost. Others saw it as a man unburdening himself of a truth he had carried too long. But what about Sally Struthers? How did she respond to this unexpected revelation? That answer came later, and it revealed just how much she had been holding back too. Struthers stayed silent for weeks after O'Connor's emotional interview. When she finally responded, it was through a little-known podcast. No fanfare, no headlines. When asked about O'Connor's comments, Sally Struthers admitted, "I watched every second of it, and I cried." It was the first time she had spoken openly about their estrangement, and what followed was filled with regret. She confirmed that they had not spoken in years, not out of anger, but because of timing and grief. "I didn't know what to say when Hugh died," she confessed. "I was afraid I'd make it worse, so I stayed silent. And that was the worst thing I could have done." Struthers revealed that she had tried to reconnect, but O'Connor had changed. "He was hurting, and I didn't know how to reach him," she said. That distance turned into silence. Then years. She admitted that she thought about fixing things but waited too long. "I kept hoping for the right moment," she said softly. Then it was gone. Still, she never stopped caring. She kept letters, photos, and even rewatched old episodes when she missed him. Their story was not one of betrayal. It was one of love that couldn't survive the weight of pain. No one was the villain, just two people forever connected who let time get in the way. When Carroll O'Connor passed away in 2001, the world mourned the loss of a television legend. But for Sally Struthers, it marked the end of a chapter she had never fully closed. In a quiet gesture, she attended his private memorial, not as a celebrity, but as someone saying goodbye to a piece of her own history. She did not speak at the service, nor did she give interviews afterward. But those who were there said she stood near the back, holding a single white rose. When the ceremony ended, she placed it gently by his photo, whispered something under her breath, and walked away with tears in her eyes. Years later, in a documentary celebrating All in the Family, Struthers finally offered a closing thought. "What we had was real," she said. "It didn't end the way I wanted, but I will never forget him." Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. The hurt remained, but so did the love. Their story wasn't a fairy tale, and it wasn't tidy, but it was honest. Two lives forever, linked by one of the most powerful shows in television history. Behind the laughter and the fame was a relationship filled with warmth, missteps, and the kind of pain that only deep connection can bring. In the end, what Carroll O'Connor and Sally Struthers shared was far more than a television partnership. It was a real, complicated bond, one that touched millions and still lingers quietly in the hearts of those who watched it unfold.